The LA Chargers season is just a few weeks away, and we are finally going to see the first glimpse into the LA Chargers Jim Harbaugh era. And with that all being said, today's video is going to be focused on the LA Chargers and why they may be potentially dark horse contenders to make it to the playoffs. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the LA Chargers and why they are dark horse playoff contenders. I've made a lot of videos on the Chargers in the past, some positive, some negative. Today's video is going to be a bit more optimistic at looking at this LA Chargers team, and I'm going to be giving you guys 3 reasons as to why they might be able to make the playoffs this year. Now with that all being said, if you do go on to enjoy today's video, and if you do enjoy the content in general, please hit the like and subscribe button because that would help me out a ton. Let's hop into the video. So as I mentioned, I got 3 reasons as to why the Chargers are a bit underrated and potentially dark horse contenders, and let's start off with number 1. The team is actually kind of decent. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I know I've made a couple of negative videos talking about this team and why I don't really love the general roster, and I'm not going to try to change face here and pretend like I love the roster, but we'll talk a bit more optimistically about each player than I have been in some past ones. We'll start off with the offense, then we'll talk about the defense, and in general, I'm more optimistic about this offense than I am the defense. Looking at the offense, obviously Justin Herbert is the main guy at quarterback. If he goes down, the whole team goes down. He is, in my opinion, a top 10 quarterback, and talent-wise, arguably a top 5 quarterback. Herbert has put up some incredible stats, but hasn't quite proven to be a winner in this league. A lot of that is not his fault, though. He's had a bad coaching staff. He hasn't had great rosters. This year, though, he has a good coach, but I wouldn't say it's a great roster. With that all being said, though, we should all have high expectations for Justin Herbert because he has the talent and he's shown the ability to be able to play at a high level. So with that all said, I'm excited to see what Justin Herbert can do. If he somehow is able to get this team into a playoff spot, he could low-key be an MVP candidate. Then your running back room is filled with guys like Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. While I'm not in love with this running back core, Gus Edwards does always find an act to be a lot better than what his name value is. He's able to get the ball in the end zone, and that's a very valuable commodity in the NFL. You put him behind, in my opinion, a pretty decent offensive line, and I'm quite optimistic about what this run game can look like. Then you got J.K. Dobbins, who has just never been able to stay healthy, and quite honestly, I don't expect him to stay healthy, but if for some reason he is able to stay healthy, then I do think he has some potential to be pretty good this year. Behind them, you obviously have guys like Kamani Vidal and Isaiah Spiller, but we'll have to wait and see if those guys can make impacts on the year. Then you got the wide receiving core, which is typically the point of contention that I typically have with Chargers fans. I'm just not that optimistic about this receiving core, but for the sake of the video, let's be optimistic. Ladd McConkey has a ton of talent and has proven thus far in camp that he is worth the pick. He's a good player, and I think that he does have the potential to be potentially a wide receiver 2 on a pretty decent team. A bit undersized and has struggled with injuries at Georgia, but man, when he gets the ball in his hands and when he just gets the ability to go out there and run routes at a high level, he's a really good player. Surrounding him is DJ Chark and Joshua Palmer, 2 guys that have kind of reached their potential as to who they are as players. They're just really good third option receivers that are going to have to play at a higher level this upcoming season for this Chargers team. Then you have obviously Quentin Johnston, who last year had a disappointing, and I mean disappointing, rookie season, but now gets another chance to sort of prove himself and maybe live up to the hype that he once had. He is about to get a ton of opportunities in the preseason, which, by the way, I made a full video on the preseason and which players to look out for. Quentin Johnston was on that video, so at the end of this one, I'll have a link to that video. So I'm excited to see Quentin Johnston, and if you want to hear more, you could just listen to that video because I go into more detail. Then you obviously have Brandon Rice, who is a interesting player. I wouldn't say that I'm extremely excited to see what he can do, but who knows, maybe he can be something. The tight end room is a lot more of the same. They have Will Dissly, Hayden Hurst, and Donald Parham. Not really sure if any of those guys stand out amongst the rest, but I think it's solid all around. Then you have the offensive line, which I think is sort of the best part of this offense outside of Justin Herbert. Your tackle duo of Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater is absolutely ridiculous, and assuming that Joe Alt does live up to the hype, which I do expect him to do, I think this offensive line is going to be really good, especially for many years to come because of how good these young tackles are. In the interior, you have Zion Johnson, who is a tad bit underrated, but I don't know, I'm just not a huge fan of him in general. I think all in all, he should be a pretty solid left guard for this team next year, and that combination of Slater and Johnson, when healthy, is pretty fine. Bradley Bozeman will be at that center, and Jamari Salyer does look like he's going to be the right guard. Pretty interesting. I wouldn't say the offensive line is a realistic look on the offense. Now I get to the defense where I have a couple of issues, but I will again talk about this defense a bit more optimistically. Looking at the defensive line, assuming they can stay healthy, Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa will get to the quarterback and will be good players all around. Just got to stay healthy, which is their big issue. Then beside them, you have Poona Ford, Morgan Fox, Justin Aboigbe, and Tuli Tuipulotu. Of all those guys, they're all solid players, but I'm most excited to see what Tuli Tuipulotu can do in next year. He was a really good standout player for this team last year that just did not get a bunch of recognition because the team was bad, but he was able to put up a lot of stats and play at a pretty high level, so I'm excited to see what he can do in his second year in the NFL. All in all, this defensive line isn't great, but assuming they can stay healthy, I think the defensive line has the potential to be okay next year. Then your linebacking core has the likes of Junior Colson, Denzel Perriman, Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste, and Nick Neiman. Not a big fan of Denzel Perriman still being in the league, but Junior Colson and Jeremiah Baptiste has a ton of talent that I think potentially could be the combination of linebackers that go for the future for this Chargers franchise. Colson was my linebacker one in this past year's draft, so I'm excited to see what he can do for this team. Obviously, he gets to reunite with his old coach, which is pretty cool. Then you got the secondary, which is pretty good. I actually quite like the secondary a lot. Asante Samuel Jr. is obviously a pretty good cornerback. Wouldn't say he's a star, but he's pretty good. Christian Fulton is a little bit controversial, just ask Titans fans about him, but he's still a decent player. I think he has the potential to be pretty good for this team. Then next to them, you have Jasir Taylor, who I'm a lot higher on than a lot of other people. He is one of my top nickelbacks in the league. I think he has some really high potential. Then you have your safeties of Alohi Gilman and Derwin James. Derwin James has started to take a couple steps back, but assuming that he can maybe get back to shape this upcoming year, the team is going to be pretty good with him on it. So with all that said, I have a couple question marks, but I think in general, the whole team in general is just kind of decent, which is not bad for a first year retooling phase for a new head coach. But now let's get into reason number 2, which is Jim Harbaugh is a proven commodity. He has a proven track record. In case you don't know, Jim Harbaugh has been around the league for many years. He started coaching all the way back in 1994 with Western Kentucky before entering the NFL as a quarterbacks coach in 2002 with the Oakland Raiders. And then ultimately he would land his way to the San Francisco 49ers in 2011 to 2014, in which he was able to turn a franchise that had 8 consecutive playoff misses into 3 straight NFC Championship games. Then, of course, we all know what would happen. He would lose a Super Bowl, go to Michigan, have a ton of success there, win a national championship, and then get the option to be the coach for the LA Chargers, which he would ultimately take. He has a proven record, and I think, yes, those teams were uber talented with a lot of great players, and maybe this team doesn't have the same talent that those Niners team had, but when you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert, when you have this offensive line, when you have the run-oriented system that Jim Harbaugh has, I think there's a lot of really good things that could come out of it. I liked the hire of Jim Harbaugh. I wasn't as high on him as I was some other coaching hires like Mike McDonald, for example, but I still do like the Jim Harbaugh hire a lot. I think he has a lot of potential for this team, and if there was going to be a coach that could turn a team around in like 1 or 2 years, I would probably say it was Jim Harbaugh. I think Jim Harbaugh's system is actually going to work quite nicely for this team. Again, it's a run-oriented system that's going to run the ball down your throat very often and really take a lot of pressure off of Justin Herbert, which in my opinion was priority number 1 this offseason for this Chargers team. Give Herbert some help, and I think they definitely did do so by fixing up this offensive line, adding some new weapons, getting some new running backs, and bringing in a new head coach with a different philosophy. I think Justin Herbert's job got a lot easier, which maybe could be beneficial for his career. Yes, it could hurt his stats because they're going to run the ball more, but man, it's going to lead to a lot more success, hopefully. So for the sake of this marriage of Herbert and Harbaugh, I actually think it's going to be really fun to watch. Again, more run-oriented team, which you don't really see often in the NFL, but if it can look similar to the Chiefs or if it could look similar to the Lions, then I'm all for it. But for my third reason as to why the Chargers are Dark Horse Playoff Contenders, let's talk about their schedule. Now, when I look at their schedule, let's break it up into a couple different pieces. Let's start off with weeks 1 through 4, which is all their games before the bye week. By the way, NFL, for the love of God, stop giving teams a week 5 bye week. That is absolutely way too early. In the first 4 weeks, you have the Las Vegas Raiders, Carolina Panthers, Pittsburgh Steelers, and Kansas City Chiefs. And of those first 4 games, I do think 3 of them are extremely winnable. Obviously, the Chiefs one you're probably not going to win, but you never know. However, the Raiders and the Pittsburgh Steelers are decent teams, but I definitely do see a world where the Chargers could beat them. And Carolina, they should be able to beat the Carolina Panthers. So just now, that's 3 potentially winnable games for this Chargers team. Then let's go past the bye weeks. In week 6, you have the Broncos. Week 7, you have the Cardinals. Week 8, you have the Saints. Week 9, you have the Browns. And week 10, you have the Tennessee Titans. This little stretch of games here is extremely winnable. Hell, I think they could win all 5 of these games, But I think worst case scenario, you lose to the Browns and maybe lose to the Saints, but you still won 3 of the last 5. And of these 5 games, I do think 4 of them are extremely winnable, with the only one that isn't quite winnable being the Browns. And just right through the first 10 weeks of the season, that's like 7 games or 8 games that are winnable for this Chargers team. After week 10, you have the Bengals, Ravens, Falcons, and the Chiefs. All 4 of these games are, in my opinion, not very winnable. I think they probably won't win any of these games. But if you do want to say that the Atlanta Falcons are a winnable matchup for the Chargers, then go ahead. That's an extra winnable game for this team. Then to end the season off, you have the Buccaneers, the Broncos, the Patriots, and the Raiders. 4 very winnable games for this Chargers team. So all in all, just off of that, I think there is about 11 winnable games for this Chargers team. And if you do want to include that Falcons team, that is 12 very winnable games for this Chargers team to potentially get. Now, when I say that those are winnable games, that doesn't mean they're going to win those games. That just means that I think they have a legitimate chance to win those. And you also have to assume that they'll likely upset a team like Kansas City or Baltimore or Cincinnati eventually, so maybe add another win or 2 right there. So hypothetically speaking, let's say of those 11, or let's go with 12, we'll include the Falcons for the sake, and let's say of those 12 games, they managed to win 8 of those games. And then of all the games that I did not include as winnable, let's say they somehow are able to win 2 of those games. Let's say they beat the Chiefs once and beat the Browns for whatever reason. Then right then and there, the Chargers just won 10 games and have a legitimate chance of making the wild card. And while that scenario sounds extremely optimistic, it is a real avenue that this team could go down. But alright, we talked about the 3 reasons. Let's now give you guys the total truth. Do I think this team is going to make the playoffs? Probably not. That might be a bit of an uncomfortable truth for Chargers fans. The schedule is easy. You gotta believe in Herbert. You gotta believe in Harbaugh, which I do. But ultimately, there are so many, and I mean so many, good teams in the AFC, whether it's the Bengals, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Browns, the entirety of the AFC North, the Buffalo Bills, the New York Jets, the Miami Dolphins. You get my point. There's so many good AFC teams that it really makes it hard for this Chargers team that I think is clearly playing with a bit of a talent deficiency. But again, if we're looking at this from an extreme optimistic view, which a lot of Chargers fans are going to do, the talent is there, the coaching staff is there, the schedule is there, which is maybe the most important thing. And yeah, there's a path for them to make the playoffs this year. But of course, take everything I just said with a grain of salt. And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button. And I love you guys. Peace.